So my name is Craig. If you're here, you probably know why, so I'll skip ahead. So some of the things that I'll talk about are this interesting overlap between video games, role-playing games, and the internet. The place that they overlap is the concept that there's a lot of people, hackers, many other users of all of them, that engage in zero consequence and guilt-free behaviors. And they do that because of the perception of anonymity between their one class of identities and the one that they use to pay taxes and go to work and so on. But they would be surprised to find out how easy it is to bind those two classes of identity. So hackers, for instance, might be surprised that their hacker identity can be easily bound to the one that has a home address that cops can go to. The other thing that I'll keep coming back to and hitting the button again and again through the presentation is that most biometric implementations done by companies actually reduce the overall levels of security of their enterprise. Biometrics, if not implemented properly, decreases the level of security you have. So part of it is the fact that biometrics are a kind of password that you cannot effectively do a password reset on. You can reset the hashes and various things that you're deriving from biometrics, but if the biometrics themselves, the root of trust of biological identity, are exposed in social media and others through audio recordings, photos and videos, 3D models, and other things, while being bound to metadata, you can pivot on the metadata and bring those back together. But if the biometrics themselves are exposed on social media, you don't need to do most of that. You can just look it up. You can start with a real human identity pulled from any of many sources and drop that straight into a customer registration process, for instance. So at that point, the customer registration process believes that it's an actual legitimate human, a biological being, tied to a bunch of identifiers that are then about to get assigned debt or transaction or retail deliveries or paychecks. And of course, if they've been pulled from social media, that isn't true. So what can people expose? Well, their faces, their eye patterns, the patterns of their voice, which many of you may be familiar with, are used by banks to authenticate voice for getting access to things like mortgages, hand and palm prints, and a variety of other deeper things like the patterns of ears, the patterns of gait, G-A-I-T, so the patterns of walking. Those are uniquely identifiable, so when someone walks down a sidewalk, even if their face is covered and their hands are covered and it's winter, you can tell who that person is by the pattern of their movement. These are all things that are exposed in various formats. So I'll talk briefly. So it's too far for you to read on the back, but that's okay. You don't really need to read this, and in any event, the slides are available. There's a number of industrial standards for fingerprints, and really what that means is there's a number of ways to upload something that looks like a fingerprint into a system relying on one of these industrial standards. So if you can get a fingerprint from any source, whether it's a photograph of a fingerprint, a photograph of a finger, or a variety of other sources, you can then input it into any of these standards-based devices. So where would you get these from? Well, there's millions of profiles on places like Instagram. So the photograph of a fingerprint posted here can be blown up as it is on the far right, and you can do simple techniques. If anyone's heard of the television show Mythbusters, they did effectively this, blew up the picture, such as the picture on the right, and just took a marker to it. So they printed it out, took a marker to it, made the lines on the fingerprint a little bit darker, and then printed it onto silicon, put it on their finger, and did exactly what you would expect in a movie, and it would pass biometric systems straight from a picture. So what's the scale of exposure? So in terms of biometrics, if you want to come up with a living human, you just look at, in this case, Google. So all of these are living humans. The thing about this is that this isn't an abstract example. These are living human models. So if you take those eyes that represent actual living human people, those models, those actual specific individuals, will now be registered into systems. So those models, those actual people, if they try to get a mortgage through the bank that a hacker registered them to, they'll show up as already having 5,000 credit cards or whatever the abuse was. An example that I like to pull out is that in China, they have a social credit system heavily based on biometrics, heavily based on facial recognition. There was a model whose face was posted on the side of a bus, and as the bus kept driving up and down the street, traffic cameras registered every time that picture, that face, that headshot drove past the cameras as jaywalking. Every time they saw that and assigned a negative social credit score to the fact that the model jaywalked, that decreased her ability to gain access to various public systems. And later, when she actually found out about it, there was a wide range of things that she simply could not do, including leave the country. So the process that she had to come up with, using her celebrity, was to work with politicians that she had celebrity-level access to create a custom process that allowed her to disenroll herself from social credit biometric systems. Obviously, this would not be available to anybody else, but the fact that she did it created a process that was then something that hackers and other people could then use to disenroll themselves as well. Telegram. There's a number of systems that rely on proof of life. So proof of life is motion, change in attitude, aspect, pitch, yaw, roll, those kinds of things. So really what that means is that if you record video and play it back to a biometric system, they will see that proof of life. There's some other features about proof of life that I'll talk about in a few seconds. But by playing a video into a biometric system, it will probably recognize the image on the right as an eye. More sensitive sensors won't, but that just means you need to do more tricks that I'll talk about. Exposures in Facebook. So as a corporate security person, you may say, well, you know, maybe I should block Telegram. I should crawl all of the eyes on Telegram, add them to a suspect list, which already sounds like a pain in the butt, and then try to use that to manage my risk. But of course, they're also on Facebook. So are you going to block both Telegram and Facebook? Or are you going to crawl all the faces and eyes on Facebook and Telegram and Instagram and YouTube and TikTok? Obviously not. One of the things I'll mention about TikTok, and this happens to be a picture of hands, TikTok is relatively unique in that a lot of TikTok videos are very short. They contain a full facial profile. They contain movement. They may contain pictures of ears. They may be shot in high quality video containing lots of very good pictures of eyes and iris. They may contain voice, and depending on what the video is, it may contain a bit of walking, a bit of gait analysis detail. So TikTok videos are actually extremely rich for gathering very detailed, high integrity, so all of the different kinds of biometrics are all contained in one block attached to one human kinds of information. And I'll also talk in a couple of slides about all of the telemetry that's bound to different kinds of video as well. So also exposure on Twitter. And here's probably the most juicy one, exposure on government portals. So generally speaking, when you have politicians will have journalists in the audience. Journalists have high quality equipment, high quality microphones, and the politicians have lots and lots of video feed, lots and lots of pictures taken of them. in all these high quality places. Those pictures are then posted to very public places, right? Newspapers and others, government portals. So far higher quality than a TikTok video are videos posted by politicians to political or government places. So it's actually far easier to take all of the biometrics of a politician and use them to register for biometric systems than it is even just people on Twitter or TikTok. So that being the case, what are the political consequences? If a hacker does something like gather all the political information they can and without hope of payment, registers all the politicians for all the pedophile rings or for all of the fraud rings. One of the things about fraud is that when it's detected, all the people that are committing fraud get blocked. So if you immediately block all the biometrics of all the politicians, perhaps they can't get into their banks anymore. Perhaps they can't make their mortgage payments anymore, do their online banking. So this becomes a scalable attack on perhaps choke points of influence. Different platforms have different kinds of information, and this slide is part of the slides that are going to be shared. And there's a couple of other slides like this. So this could be used for maybe strategy or something like that. On the far right, you have faces, eyes, and a set of vertical lines representing voice. And at the very bottom, you can see hand and also ear. So the various systems have lots of different information. As you can see, Facebook is probably the highest concentration of easily sourced biometrics. There's also unintended and intended exposure. So for instance, here we have somebody that's purposely exposing their information. Here we have somebody who is doing a very common politician kind of pose, a calming, reassuring, palms up, trust me kind of pose. And of course, that exposes all of their fingerprints and all of their palm prints. Can you hear me in the back far corner? Perfect, thank you. Some other unintended exposures, so any kind of crafting thing, anything that involves tactile kind of involvement is something that's going to expose fingerprints and probably the voice of the person explaining the task. Anything involving tattoos, any kind of unique identifier, scars. If somebody has a developmental issue, those are all uniquely identifiable as well, especially when bound with telemetry. So this is a Facebook picture of a dirty glass. This is a valid fingerprint that can be used to register for websites. The other thing about news articles of any kind, you know, some of us here who are speakers wind up in news articles or interviewed by journalists, and perhaps the journalists take pictures. The telemetry, or the metadata I should say, that goes with that, from the back you can't read this, but the top keywords are male, man, men, business, financial, finance, Asia, Asian, Europe. And this is specifically around the Henderson Group CEO, Andrew Formica, in the city of Singapore, region Singapore, and then goes on to say his job, the business article that someone can use for operational intelligence, and a bunch of other things. And it also has his face, his facial recognition pattern, a high quality picture of his eyes, and other things. Something I'll go into more detail on is the fact that when a relatively high quality photo is posted to the internet or posted to a news forum, it might be pretty high quality, but if you reformat the web request, you'll actually pull the true photo in far, far, far more detail, far more resolution. So some of the hashtags and pivots that you can use. So you can actually do very large scale searches across many different channels if you're looking for somebody. So this is a thing that I'll drill into a little bit. if you have photo ID, let's pretend we're going into something like a bar as a teenager. If you have a photo ID that looks close enough to you, that will be enough to physically get you into a particular system. So if you have, like I have a particular pattern of facial recognition data points, if I want to create something that looks like Craig Gibson or anybody in the audience, I can just look everywhere in the world for someone with facial recognition data points close enough to my target, if they're not online. If they are online, I would just use theirs. So talking in a little bit more detail about sensors. So the eye detection algorithm looks at an eye and abstracts it. How am I doing for time? Okay. So the eye detection algorithm looks at an eye and abstracts it. So it looks for a number of data points and calls the data points an eye. When we talk about that, it's really how do we game the definition of an eye for a sensor. So at that point, doing experiments, Vladimir Kropotov, who did these specific experiments within Trend Micro, started at a more detailed level than the actual algorithm itself to define what an eye is. And so he went on to make a bunch of fake or synthetic eyes on the right. Then he realized that if you take a drop of water and put it on a Trend Micro mouse pad, an eye scanner will allow it to register to a system. And the critical things, you may not notice, but that mouse pad says Trend Micro. The C in Trend Micro, or the circular thing with the white dot on it, the fact that the white dot is in the open area of the letter C, that's actually an important part, because the C then becomes an iris. And the point of reflection is obviously a point of reflection. So the fact that it considers the letter C to be an iris is really the trick that let it in. So, with all those tricks, you can synthesize Mark Zuckerberg's eyeball without actually having, so the picture on the right is just a control, a test. But with a little bit of data telemetry and a drop of water, you can completely synthesize, without ever having an actual picture of an actual eyeball, Mark Zuckerberg's eyeball. And if you go into places Mark Zuckerberg might access, it will try to respond. So that's probably the most meaty thing there, is that even if somebody has never had biometric pictures posted to the internet, you can still get into biometric systems. So are there good things? So this is an interesting thing. So this is a BBC article about a hacker who managed to get into a variety of places, and one of the real thresholds for being a hacker is that if you, yes, learn how to use tools, yes, get into systems, yes, steal valuable data, and yes, actually manage to figure out how to do the money laundering to monetize the data, to the point where you don't get caught trying to monetize the data and arrested, to the point where you can actually buy something. That's really the threshold of being a hacker. If you can monetize something to be able to pay for it without getting arrested, that makes you a hacker. Everything before that is sort of practice. So what this hacker did is, the very first thing he did with his monetized money is he posted to his hacker account some expensive cheese showing his fingerprints, which resulted in his arrest because his hacker identity was now bound to his street address and his taxpayer identity. So that article's online. But I happened to be told yesterday by the cybercrime director of Interpol, they do that all the time. That's one of the handy ways that they extract biometrics to go after hackers to bridge those identities. So what are some other abuses? So we talked about methods, but here's use cases. So crypto wallets. So they ask for proof of life, they ask for deep fakes, they ask for a variety of other identifiers used in authentication. But of course, those can be modified and bypassed and so on. So here's an underground job ad. So this job ad was actually written by hackers, and they were asking for deepfake specialists. They basically need to replace face on a video, nothing global, but they need to unlock crypto exchange accounts. So they're explicitly hiring somebody to bypass the biometrics on crypto. And this particular underground deepfake is a method of getting into Binance, a crypto forum. And once that was accessed, there was I can't remember the specific number, but there was a large number of wallets that were compromised. Here's a slightly more silly one, but you can abstract it and identify what it is that we're talking about here, is that you can create, so everybody behaves, at least in part, according to social mimicry. So when celebrities or others instruct us to do a thing, well, they're a well-known person. You didn't hear that they were hurt because of the thing that they're talking about, so it must be okay. So the thing here is that by making deepfakes about well-known personas espousing particular things, you don't need the top 10% of the most qualified and richest people to respond. You just need a bunch of people to respond. The actual threshold for executing this kind of attack is very low and very cheap, and what it amounts to is basically phishing. Please invest in my thing. Please give me money without justification. So here's some attack scenarios and criminal monetization models. And I have to admit, I don't have my clock. How many minutes do I have left? 30. So criminal monetization models. So when we're talking about various messenger scams, as soon as we have biometrics, which can include also the mimicry of writing patterns. So not everybody includes biometrics as a particular pattern of speech. So my voice has a particular pattern, and that's uniquely identifiable, but the way that I write, the words that I use, the pacing and tone of how I write emails or how I write personal messaging messages, those things are also biometric. They measure my behavior more than my physiology, but they're also biometric. So these messenger scams, are really about getting into somebody's messenger account and then doing things like requesting money, requesting support, requesting access to people, requesting information about what are you doing tomorrow? Oh, you're going to be out of the house. Good to know. Thank you. Things like that. As far as messenger scams, there's a class of messenger scam some of you may remember called Robin Sage. And Robin Sage was a class of social engineering executed by American Special Forces, I think it was. Pardon me if I'm wrong. American Special Forces operator, sturdy man, created a fictitious identity of a woman named Robin Sage, who was a member of the American intelligence community, who was looking to have a senior mentor from somebody in the American government. So this fictitious identity was used to approach as part of a very manual, very laborious, expensive loyalty campaign, testing the loyalty of a variety of different people within the American government. And this fictitious identity was used as part of this messenger scam or information operation to approach all of these government officials. And the government officials were people in the intelligence community, politicians, high-ranking military officials, and others that have superior access to a variety of different kinds of information, whether it's classified, tactical, strategic, economic, or others. So this identity, Robin Sage, which was quite some time ago, was used to compromise intelligence agencies, government agencies, classified programs, and a variety of other things, purely through the quality of the social engineering involved. That's very laborious. By using patterns of speech, patterns of tone, patterns of voice, facial patterns, deep fakes, an entirely fictitious person can be created. And the thing I want to highlight is that it can be done at scale. So the laborious Robin Sage persona took an enormous amount of effort and money, resulting in one persona. If you know marketing level information on 100,000 targets that you already know that have access to important information, have access to other things that you want, perhaps at a state actor level, you can take that and identify what kind of person they are most vulnerable to, the one that they have the highest pupil dilation to, meaning that they're most sexually attracted to, and a variety of other things. And by creating the perfect woman or partner or whatever the preference is of the individual, by creating that perfect person, the chemical response that overrides judgment is relatively extreme. And at that point, you can push down the judgment, push down the defensive floor of humans to the point where the scalable response using perhaps artificial intelligence and perhaps ChatGPT or other things can be used to tell them exactly what they want to hear, compromising things in more detail than would have been available otherwise. An extension of this is something called whaling. So you've heard of phishing, obviously. Whaling is the other end of the spectrum, sort of a reverse of all the economics. Phishing is a very large-scale, low reward, but high volume class of attack. The reverse of that is whaling, where you have a lot of effort to compromise a small number of people to get a very high return. But again, a lot of effort doesn't really apply when you're doing things like scalable mass biometric profiling to fuel things like artificial intelligence agents, creating a extremely targeted, extremely successful, extremely customized class of messaging. And if that is instant messaging, that's one thing, but if it's email, because there's an implied credibility that goes with email, and because business email compromise involves things like approvals, attachments, potentially malware-affected attachments, an email from a supposed executive telling their secretary to invoke a password reset, telling a secretary to contact somebody in the name of an executive approving a wire transfer, or a variety of other things. These whaling class attacks are currently profiled by the amount of effort and complexity and deep insider knowledge that are required. But by applying biometrics and some of the things that I've mentioned, that threshold goes down, allowing automated agents to do it. So at that point, we're talking about very scalable, very profound, very high impact, industry-wide or multi-industry-wide, emerging classes of attacks. So I've talked about creation of accounts. That button that I want to keep pushing is when you implement biometrics, especially if it's as part of the initial registration process, perhaps of new customers or that sort of thing. Initial registration fraud is something that the telecom sector has struggled with for a very long time. So there is no universal database of biometric identifiers, no canonical federated universal database of biometric identifiers. So there's no way to say that this person at this address using these identifiers is that person. So anybody can walk up and say, sure, I live at 1234, whatever street, and here's some stuff I scraped off Instagram. Send me stuff. Here's my stolen credit card. Ship me all the stuff that I want. And if it would be drug precursors or machinery necessary to make a bomb, these are things that now get assigned to whoever's biometric identifiers were the ones that were stolen. Account hijacking. If there's a biometric system that initial registration fraud can be practiced against, well, you can just use someone else's real identity and log into their account. So their biometrics are actually, if you implement things in a particular way, the actual security of your actual system goes down when you implement biometrics as another source of trust, because it's not trustworthy. It's everywhere. Everyone has their faces exposed right now. And because they're like passwords, having your face exposed is the equivalent of putting your password on a sticky note on your forehead. Blackmail. So what would happen if somebody called you and said, I've registered you, you're a politician or you're a businessman, I've registered you in all of the pedophile websites, all the ones that are most reprehensible to your voting public or your board of directors or whatever. Please send me Bitcoin and I won't post them. Does somebody actually need to do that, or do they just need to threaten that? If you don't do it, I guess you'd find out. Disinformation campaigns. If you can be anyone, you can say anything and have it assigned to them. The trust that's implicit in someone's appearance and persona winds up being the amplifier for whatever that disinformation message is. There can be a variety of implementations of this. So if you implement something saying a specific tech billionaire died, and you short the stock of that, you just made a lot of money. There's a large number of implementations of that. Tech support scams. You need to install a patch. Click the button. For questions, click this, and I'll walk you through the process. Walking you through the process, of course, is turning off all of your security systems or implementing all of the various privileges necessary for an APT. One of the things about biometrics is that social engineering remains one of the most potent attacks, bypassing almost all security of any kind. So if you call into a call center, or tech support center, or whatever it might be, and you say, like, let's say you call into a telco, and you say, I'm your customer, I have all of the information you expect to hear from me as a customer, but I've lost my cell phone while fishing. My SIM card is gone, my phone is gone, all of my hardware level identifiers are at the bottom of the ocean. May I have a new SIM card that I can put in the phone that I just bought or just found at the bottom of my drawer? When they assign you a new SIM card, as a result of this kind of social engineering attack, that new SIM card can be used to do password resets on all the banking and all the other systems that are attached to that SIM card. So at that point, you've effectively done SIM jacking. What a lot of tech support call centers, including banks and phone companies, are doing is implementing voice recognition so as to improve the security of their call center. But that just adds another step. That just means that they need to have a copy of your voice from Facebook or whatever, so as to be able to walk through that voice authentication system to gain access to the SIM card, to gain access to all of the password resets, to gain access to the content of your bank account. And of course, hijacking Internet of Things devices. That same technique, when used against telcos, allows you to get access to IoT gateways, factory gateways, and others. And this is too long, don't read. It's part of the deck. So when you take a look at the deck by downloading it, then you'll have that. And the same here. Probably the easiest approach is unlocking laptop, phone, and other gadgets. Fingerprint recognition on phones, fingerprint recognition on laptops and others. So these are the sort of last few slides before we get into any questions you may have, and I hope you're thinking of some good ones. I like to harvest the best questions. So it's a low technical barrier, and it gets lower all the time. The tools are becoming free, easy to get. They start being in suites of tools. There's a report I did, malicious use and abuse of AI, that was jointly published with United Nations Interregional Criminal Justice Research Institute, or UNICRI, and Europol EC3, the Cybercrime Center. So that was well received, but there's a whole section on deepfakes, the application of AI, the application of all of this telemetry fusion to create a functional avatar of a person and to bypass things like authentication and others at scale using high automation. You know, even though I use words like AI and other things, it's still a low skill barrier. Anyone with moderate programming skills can get an AI to sing and dance. And the thing that I highlighted a little earlier is mass initial registration fraud. So if you have customer registration and somebody wants to gain 1 million of something, they just get 1 million instances of biometrically authenticated identities to do that. So, assume compromise, trust no one. Biometric zero trust. So the thing about zero trust is that it's where most security is opt-in. So if someone wants to make shadow IT, they just hide and don't opt in. Zero trust is opt-out. So if you have shadow IT, it suddenly stops working, and then someone complains, why isn't my shadow IT working? And then you say, well, it's shadow IT. You should stop that. Same thing for biometrics. If someone's running a biometric system or has breaches on biometric systems, deviations of typical behavior, you know, secretaries don't try to log into data center admin portals. That kind of thing is something that can be bound into biometric zero trust. You can use it as enrichment, but not replacement. So where I'm going with that is that you can have systems that have zero trust, let's say, and biometrics on top of it, but you can say, oh, well, I recognize Jim. Jim is the one that's supposed to be using that platform. Jim's on vacation because he's in a place that has no cellular or internet access. The fact that I see Jim in that specific circumstance instantly tells me we have a breach, and specifically that it's someone who has access to biometrics. So biometrics is a way of saying that, yes, this is a breach. And you can minimize the quality of exposed media, so you can just step it down. You can say, this media that I'm about to expose is too low a quality to be useful in authentication processes. And I've included the same line again. But use specific security processes for trusted and untrusted environments. If it's a trusted environment, probably don't use biometrics. Biometrics just opens gates that you don't want to have open. Ensure the security of storage processing, the whole lifestyle of business processes that rely on biometrics. If somebody has a system that's using biometrics to gain access to very high quality goodies, it's probably pretty easy to just breach that. And once you have all that, now you have access to all the goodies. But because it's your face is a password, and you can't reset the password, the second your biometric database is breached, now what? You have to throw out basically all that investment because it's unusable. You can't re-register a new face from a new person. Or if you do, that's yet another vector, right? And increase awareness about the existence of deep fakes. You know, just because somebody looks like somebody you know, that doesn't really mean anything. That's the same thing as spoofing, basically. And there's also real-time implementations for all of these things can be adopted for conference calls, Zoom, any other kind of video conferencing as well. So I would like to suggest anybody contact me at Craig_Gibson@trendmicro.com, or take a look at our research paper, Leaked Today, Exploited for Life. It's a free paper that I get rated on how many people download it, so please download it 5 times. It does, to start a bot system, yeah. Buy something off Twitter. But yeah, and there's also a report that I mentioned earlier, the malicious use and abuse of AI. That's another paper that you may like to read. It's got a big section on approximately these kinds of topics. So we have 10 minutes for questions right now. And I see one question here and then another question there. Go ahead, sir.
One of the big selling points of a lot of social media apps is the very easy and convenient way to apply filters, some sort of overlay on top of the raw picture or video that you're applying. Would something like that be able to at least, maybe not completely mitigate, but perhaps make it more difficult for these types of attacks to happen?
There is something that I've been trying to explore, is just putting a default, this is a Facebook eyeball, on top of all Facebook people. So anyone trying to breach an account using a Facebook eyeball just shows up as being the Facebook eyeball, of which there's only one. And of course, it might be blue or green or whatever, but of course now you can blacklist the green eyeball, the blue eyeball, the so on and so on. So that might be one approach, but that also includes, now you have to match this and pre-filter the images, and that's perhaps a bit of effort, but it would bypass the potential risk of that particular platform.
My question is, this has been a debate for a while, biometric identifiers cannot be changed, they're compromised. Why are we thinking of them as passwords? Why don't we think of them as usernames instead? Add 10 passwords to them that can be changed, can be temporary.
That would be an excellent approach. As long as you're not using the actual biometrics as the authentication, you're excellent. Go ahead, sir.
And that was kind of going to be my question isn't biometric, whatever it is, right? Fingerprint, voice, face, is simply a complex implementation of user ID, right? And to kind of extend what I think he was saying after that is, what you really need to prove is the participation of the stuff in here, right? You have to prove that.
Correct.
And gait doesn't prove that, hand motions don't prove that. Something that you have to elicit from the mind is what proves who the person is, right? And an implementation that I've been thinking about for a while is, the reason it works on my iPhone is because I put it on my iPhone, right? But if you're going to use biometrics with a system at the far end, the biometrics shouldn't be in the system at the far end. The biometrics should be in the system that I possess. And the system that I possess should interact in a way, perhaps using X509 certificates or some other methodology, where I register my image to the iPhone as my authenticator to the iPhone, and then I register my iPhone, the device, to the far end. Then I have to prove myself to the iPhone, which is always local to me, as opposed to proving myself to the system, which is never local to me. And it's easier to compromise the conduit between myself and the system at the far end, somewhere in the middle, and thereby bypass all the security that might exist at all.
So there's, thank you. So there's two elements there. One is one's resident in a perhaps unpopular term called semantic computing, which is going to become increasingly important going forward. So that's this concept of identity risk. So when you have whatever identifiers, when you bottle those up as signals and put them as categories of behavior, you can then say these behaviors, regardless of whether they're authenticated or not, regardless of whether they're a customer or not, regardless of whether it's a bot or a machine or an AI, the behaviors are the ones that are blocked. Regardless of whether those behaviors are spread throughout a supply chain, regardless of whether they're roaming, whether they're cars or life critical or not life critical, the behaviors are blocked. And that's a conspicuously 6G, very fast wire speed kind of approach. Because by putting those signals and identity risk behaviors very high architecturally, it allows you to have very, very limited processing load, and therefore capital expenditure and OpEx and digging trenches and putting up satellites and all these other kinds of expensive things. You have to have less satellites and less trenching by putting it very high architecturally. The lower it gets, the closer to the edge it gets, the more it costs. So when you put put everything in the device, not only is it closer to the hacker and closer to all of the fake customers, let's say, but the more it costs and the higher processing load there is, as well as the increased trust on something that the back-end system, which is where all the money is and where all the risk is, the corporations and the assets and inventory, where all those are. Those back-end things now has to trust, you know, a phone that they've never seen before, created by a manufacturer they've never seen before, that is not compliant with their procurement policies, that is not compliant with US federal government zero trust policies and a variety of other things. So your approach is excellent for the individual, but it is incredibly expensive for the actual guys paying for it.
Well, it does presume something I didn't mention, right? And you mentioned this, I think you mentioned this very far, or very close to the beginning. And it's a concept I put forward about a decade and a half ago that I'm calling root of proof. So the problem with today's identity systems and today's authentication of individuals is we can't prove that that person is that person earlier than whatever they hold in their hand. So my California driver's license is capable of proving who I am as of 2004. But I'm 63. I existed before 2004, but in the eyes of the state of California, and anybody who's going to put confidence in my driver's license as an identifier, can't rely on it prior to 2004. So that's, I think, an issue that we have that we're going to have a hard time coming to terms with in US society, is coming up with a way to map your identity to a starting point, which is your birth, in some way that can't be compromised, can only be utilized by you.
I would approach it from the far end. I would say that, so to take a step back, any human trust system, whether it's a classified top secret grade process or not, generally for getting top secret clearances or others, there's a process that goes 10 years back in your history, perhaps 10 years or more, and it will take a look at all of your neighbors, what they say about you, how bad you are at mowing the lawn, and all of these different criteria, which create a sense of integrity of character and a bunch of other things. You know, if you run a backyard dogfighting thing, you're probably not suited to be a leader and probably not suited for a variety of roles, but you may be very suited for other high-intensity roles. Those kinds of things. Doing that level of detail is really a risk assessment on the individual about their behaviors. And if you can say that their behaviors are very suited for accessing various kinds of resources, then of course you'll grant access to those resources. But those behaviors are identity risk signals. If you say somebody is high integrity because they, let's say, mow their lawn a lot, they have high conscientiousness, that particular personality trait, if you want to give them access to specific kinds of resources, like the lives of troops that report to them, you may give them access to that. However, the different behaviors may require access to other kinds of resources. But if you handle that as identity signals very high architecturally, again, it's very fast, very cheap, high throughput, very little back and forth talking. It's all resource and inventory based as opposed to police state. If you manage things very low, it's very police state-like. If you manage them high up, it's very commercial, very scalable. So that's how I would kind of approach that.
I'll probably hit you up afterwards.
Thank you.
Another question.
Yeah, hi.
I think this might be your last one, sorry.
Yeah.
But certainly reach out at that contact information if you have more
So
questions.
I actually like to follow up on him. I think what he presented, this is actually where we are heading right now. So I don't know whether you know about this FIDO or FIDO Alliance. So this Fast Identity Alliance, they are doing exactly the same thing. And this is basically PKI based, but you need to unlock this private key using your fingerprint or Face ID or whatever. So I see the world is actually going exactly in the direction, but the talk actually presents another problem here, right? So if someone actually steals your device, then basically, and if they can grab your Face ID or fingerprint, then everything is broken because you can unlock or log into any websites basically using that fingerprint and the Face ID. So I don't see any solution basically onto that. Any comments?
So FIDO2 alliances and cross-federation are very much a part of the identity signal high level of abstraction world, semantic computing. A FIDO2 alliance, a FIDO2 federation or cross-federation between multiple identity providers is a way of saying that, let's say, I sell low-cost, high-volume items, and therefore I trust Facebook Marketplace. I trust Facebook Marketplace's level of identity. You can sign into Facebook, and my commercial enterprise, because it's part of FIDO2, will trust those transactions coming from that Facebook identity. So that level of high-level identity signal places risk very evenly at a very acceptable threshold because they're low-cost, high-value items. On another level, you may have many, many authenticators, and perhaps you only trust banks, knowing that banks have a high level of identity signal interrogation that they do prior to considering somebody authenticated. So yeah, FIDO2 alliances are very much part of this high throughput approach. And the point that you mentioned about losing the actual biometric sort of point of sale system, which might be a phone or an actual POS device, that's a critical thing. Oh, sorry, I heard a voice over there thinking that I'm probably out of time. Oh, I guess I am out of time. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.